Hey guys, I hope you had a good weekend. I just wanted to post this video talking about drama, starting our new unit, our final unit for the year, talking about drama. And so let's talk about the nature of drama to begin with. We want to kind of get a background for drama before we start reading Macbeth. So let's talk about the nature of drama. First of all, drama is written primarily to be performed, not to be read. That's why I prefer for us to join the Zoom and read it together as a class out loud. That's just the nature of drama is just better that way because that's what it's meant to be, is to be performed, not to be just read. And so it helps us to understand, and it just sounds better if we read it out loud. The drama is normally going to present its action in a couple of ways through the actors on a stage and in front of an audience. So, first of all, through the actors. And the actors have a couple of ways of communicating directly with the audience. And you'll see some of these as we're reading Hamlet. Shakespeare used both of these. Soliloquy is the first one. When a character is having a soliloquy, that means they're speaking to themselves. So a lot of times they might step away from the action a little bit. And you can tell that they're talking to themselves. There might be other characters on the stage, but those other characters are not supposed to be hearing what this person is saying. So the soliloquy is one where the character is speaking to themselves. The second one is called an aside. And that's when a character will stop in whatever action is going on, and they will usually turn to the audience and speak directly to the audience, or will say something that is intended for the audience. And it's like the rest of the actors on the stage can't hear. They're oblivious to what's going on. An aside is specifically for the audience's benefit. So those are two things that the actors can do when they want to communicate something to the audience. Because in drama, the it's very objective. It's limited to what we can see and what we can hear. Not like when we're reading a book, reading a novel, and the author can tell us, it can be from a different point of view, and the author can tell us what this character is thinking and what this character is feeling on the printed page. But when you're watching a play, when you're watching a drama, then that can't happen. And so the actors will sometimes use one of these methods, either a soliloquy or an aside, to let you know that information that you can't know unless they tell you, to let you know what they're thinking or what they are feeling. Okay, so that's something that's a little bit different from when you were reading a book and the author can tell you everything that the character is thinking or feeling. Okay, also drama is performed on stage. When it's on stage, it can command your attention as a spectator. You don't have anything else to do. There are no other interruptions, and they have your attention. And then also, the drama is performed before an audience. And so you know how when you are watching a movie, it's always different if you're watching it with a friend or friends, or if you're watching it in a movie theater, right? If everybody else is laughing, then you're more likely to laugh. Or if people around you are crying, if it's something sad that's happening, then you're more likely to cry. You are more likely to have an emotional response when you're around others, when you're in an audience. And so that is one difference as well of drama rather than just reading something, because the experience, usually it's communal. There are other people around you who are watching the play or the movie. And so the impact of whatever's happening is intensified because there are other people there that you are sharing it with. Okay, so those are just some basics about the nature of drama. And let's talk about a couple different types of drama. We can have realistic drama or non-realistic drama. And I put this quote here because I thought this was such a good quote taken from your book. Art is always a heightening or intensification of reality, else it would have no value. And we did that journal question a couple days ago about the value, of art. And so I thought this was a great quote. Why art? Why do we enjoy art? Because it either intensifies a feeling that we have, or it can heighten that feeling. That's what gives us its value. Now, when you go to watch a drama, you go to watch a play, all stage production involves a certain necessary artificiality, right? We know that everything that's happening is not entirely true. For example, when you're watching a play, you are assuming that there's a fourth wall. Like if you're watching a scene that's in a room, right? All rooms have four walls. But when you're watching a play, that fourth wall is invisible, right? So that we can see what's happening in that room at the time. That fourth wall is invisible, it's broken down. Also, usually the audience or usually the actors are going to be doing their action and their lines facing the audience. Where again, that's a little bit of artificiality, right? If we're all sitting at the dinner table, we don't all sit so that we're facing a certain way. So that's a little bit there as well. Certain things that are done, stage makeup and costuming and acting, all of those things can be done in a way that either emphasizes realistic things or fanciful. If you're doing a play about with fairies or ghosts or something like that, then you're obviously doing things that are non-realistic. Okay. But every stage production has a little bit of artificiality to it. There are different dramatic conventions that can be used. When you're watching a play, there are a great variety of stage things that can be done. You can either watch a play that has elaborate, beautiful props and sets and backgrounds and all these things, or you can watch a play that is very bare bones. For example, Our Town by Thornton Wilder, that was written to have very, very limited props on stage. And so there's just a wide variety. Most plays fall somewhere in the middle between bare bones props and between elaborate, expensive, amazing backgrounds. Okay. The Greeks and even Shakespeare, his plays did not have elaborate sets on them. They were um, just mostly things that suggested kind of what was happening or what was going on. So there are all degrees between realism and non-realism in drama. Um, in Shakespeare, a lot of times um, the way people are speaking, you might listen to them. Like if you've read, I know you read sophomore year, you read Romeo and Juliet, and you reading that, you might think, well, nobody ever speaks that way. People who are in love don't speak to each other like Romeo and Juliet do. Well, that's true. In our everyday date lives, we don't speak to each other in blank verse with these long monologues, right? That's not the way we speak. But the purpose of the playwright isn't to just imitate actual human speech, but the playwright wants to give an accurate and powerful expression to human thought and emotion. And so, in order to do that, they have to maybe go a little bit deeper, speak a little differently than we do on a day-to-day basis. There are certain dramatic conventions that we should expect when we are watching a drama. Okay, one of those conventions would be a chorus, and this is seen in some of Shakespeare's plays. And it's very characteristic of Greek dramas, where there would be a group of actors and they would all be speaking in unison. They'd all be saying the same thing together. And that's called a chorus. Also, in some plays, you have the use of a narrator. For example, in Our Town, there is a narrator who kind of speaks to us in between scenes and things that are going on. He kind of explains what's happening. And so a narrator is another dramatic convention that can be used to help to explain a play. Now, most plays, the world into which we are taken while we're watching the play is treated as self-contained, and it makes us believe that this is a real world. So it's asking for that temporary suspension of disbelief. Remember, we talked about that back when we did our fiction unit. Samuel Taylor Coleridge always talked about that willing suspension of disbelief, so that we can enjoy the story, or in this case, enjoy the drama. If we're watching Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream and you have these fairies and everything, we know that's not real, but we are suspending that disbelief for the purposes of the drama and enjoying what's going on in the drama. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Here's another quote that was from a book that I thought was worth pointing out. Human truth, rather than fidelity to fact, is the highest achievement of literary art. So, what is the purpose of literary art? It is to show, to portray some human truth. That is what's more important than sticking a fidelity to fact, or than being exactly accurate with the facts. They're more concerned with portraying or expressing some human truth. All right, and then the last thing we want to talk about is tragedy versus comedy. You see the faces there, the symbol kind of for drama, with one face sad and one face happy. So there's a difference between tragedy and comedy. We're going to read Macbeth, which is definitely a tragedy. And then I hope that we have time before the end of the semester to also either read or see the importance of being earnest, and that is definitely a comedy. So let's talk about the difference between tragedy and comedy. Now, it's very hard to delineate. Sometimes these things kind of mix. A tragedy doesn't mean that every single thing in the play that happens is going to be sad. And a comedy doesn't mean that there's never anything serious, that everything in it is funny. Okay, that's not what tragedy and comedy means. All right, so let's talk about what is a tragedy. Okay, so first of all, there are some things. Aristotle defined a tragedy, and Aristotle thought a tragedy needed to have some certain elements to it to be a tragedy. So, what are those elements? So, let me give you a few of those. Number one, the tragic hero needs to be a man of noble stature. Usually, like a prince or a king, especially in Shakespeare, it's always somebody, a man of noble stature, either a king or a leader of some sort. Okay, so the tragic hero is a man that is noble. Secondly, the tragic hero is good. He's a good person, but he's not perfect. And his fall is a result of hamartia. And this is a term that you need to be familiar with just in case it were to show up somewhere. What is hamartia? Hamartia is a criminal act committed in ignorance or even for the sake of a greater good. So this is when your tragic hero, your hero of the story, does something wrong. It is a criminal act, but he does it either out of ignorance, he doesn't realize that it's wrong, or he does it because he believes that this act is going to cause a greater good. And so that is what hamartia is. And we'll see that in Macbeth as we're reading. We'll see his hamartia, his act that he commits that he thinks is for the greater good, but it's not. The hero has some tragic flaw in his character. There's something in his character, some fault of character that causes him to fall, and that's responsible for his downfall. So therefore, that leads us to number 3. The hero's downfall is his own fault. It is something that he has done. It is a free choice. It is an action that he has done, a choice he has made. So his downfall is his own fall. So the combination of the hero's greatness and his responsibility for his own downfall is what entitles us to describe his downfall as tragic, merely than just pathetic. So let me give you an example here. If a father of 10 children is accidentally killed at a street corner, then we would say that event is pathetic. It's not tragic. When a weak man succumbs to his weakness and something bad happens to him, then that event is pathetic. It's not tragic. Tragic is an event is tragic if there's a fall from greatness. So that's what makes it a tragedy. It's a great man, a noble person, and they fall. Okay. So that's what makes it a tragedy, not pathetic. Okay. Number 4, the hero's misfortune is not wholly deserved. So, yes, they did something wrong and they deserve some kind of punishment, but in a tragedy, the punishment far exceeds the crime. And we'll see that in Macbeth. Yes, he makes a terrible decision, but oh, he pays and pays very, very heavily for that decision. So, in a tragedy, it exceeds the punishment exceeds the crime. Okay. Um, Next, number 5, the tragic fall is not a pure loss. Usually, the hero gains some increase in awareness or self-knowledge before his death. Okay, usually, yes, in a tragedy, the noble person dies. Um, but usually before they die, they have this aha moment. They have this awareness or learn something about themselves. Unfortunately, it's not enough to save them, but they do have this moment of awareness before their death. And then number 6, tragedy, when it is performed well, does not leave its audience in a state of depression. Okay, it shouldn't, when we are finished watching a tragedy, we shouldn't just be extremely depressed. Instead, there should be a feeling, instead of being beaten down, there should be a feeling that, yes, this was a tragic, maybe waste, but there is a recognition of human greatness in the sense that human life has unrealized potentialities. We'll see in Macbeth, he had so much potential, so much going for him, but because of his hamartia, all of that is wasted. And so we leave the tragedy thinking, if I make better choices, right, then I can have I can maybe realize my potential. So those are some of the things that make a tragedy a tragedy. Okay. Now let's talk about a comedy. There are a couple types of comedy. The first one is a scornful comedy, which is a satire, kind of making fun of something, in making fun of human nature. And then there is another one, a romantic comedy. A comedy is going to delineate human weakness, okay? Where a tragedy is emphasizing human greatness because we have this great noble character and they have a fall. Comedy, though, is going to talk about or point out human weakness. So we have a couple of different kinds, the scornful and the romantic. Comedy is usually going to expose human folly. And so it's partly critical and partly corrective. Like, notice this about us as humans and let's try to fix it or let's try to be aware of it. Comic plots usually are not as likely to follow a plot line that tragedies do. Tragedies follow a very logical cause and effect progression. Comedies aren't necessarily going to do that. Comedies are going to have things in them like unlikely coincidences and improbable disguises and mistaken identities. You'll see that one in The Importance of Being Earnest. All of these things are what make comedy and make us laugh. Okay. And also, not only make us laugh, but illuminate some folly about human nature. Okay. There are two other things that we want to, I already mentioned this. So, tragedy emphasizes human greatness, a comedy delineates human weakness. And then two other things that would go along with tragedy and comedy. These ones are more commercial, though. Melodrama is like tragedy, but it tries to arouse feelings of fear and pity, but it does so through cruder means. So let me give you some examples of melodrama. You have your conflict between good and evil, and it's just oversimplified. For example, a young mother and her baby are evicted into a howling storm by a villainous man who holds the mortgage on the house. Okay, that would be melodrama. The heroine is tied to the railroad tracks and the train is approaching. That's melodrama. So, most importantly, good usually finally triumphs over evil, and the ending is usually happy. Typically, at the end, the hero marries the heroine. Villainy is foiled or crushed. And those are all melodrama. Okay. Farce, though, on the other hand, that is a type of comedy that's aimed at rousing explosive laughter. These are the things that are just to make you laugh out loud. Coarse wit, practical jokes, physical action. Characters trip over benches and insult each other, run into walls, knock each other down, get into fights. That is a farce, and that's a lot of what we see in movies, comedies today. So farce is again more commercial than it is literary. So melodrama and farce are not really literary types of drama, but I just wanted to mention those to you. Okay, so that is the difference between tragedy and comedy, and that just gives you a little bit of a background into drama.